So good morning. On behalf of Cornell and S. Bowers College of Computing and Information Science, it's my great pleasure to welcome you to today's panel, AI Education, Teaching and Learning in the Age of AI. My name is Claire Cardie. I'm a professor in the Computer Science Department and in the Information Science Department here in Bowers. I'm also Associate Dean for Education for Cornell Bowers. But we have three much more stellar panelists with us today. First, Professor Steve Jackson. He's a professor in the Information Science Department in Bowers and also Vice Provost for Academic Innovation. Second is Professor David Mimno. He's professor and chair of information science here at Cornell and Ph.D. student in information science, Jadon Geathers. We also have, I believe, not one, but two Bowers Deans in the building. Interim Dean Torsten Joachims, and in a couple of days, there he is, new incoming Dean Soren Lerner. Finally, I was just warned that there are two previous presidents here as well. So welcome to Jeff Lehman. There we go. And our own computer scientist, Martha Pollack. So as the title of today's panel implies, we'll be exploring how AI, artificial intelligence, is transforming educational practices and outcomes at Cornell and beyond. You'll also hear how Cornell's strength in computer and information science and AI is driving innovation in education. The way it will work is each of our panelists will have a chance to present on this topic individually. And after that, I'll moderate a brief back and forth with them. But we'll be saving some time at the end for Q&A from the audience. So please hold your questions until that point. So at this time, please join me in welcoming to the podium our first presenter, Steve Jackson.
All right. Thank you, Claire. Thank you, everyone. And I was up late last night watching the baseball game. So I apologize for this. I also apologize for being Canadian, but Canadians do that a lot, I guess. All right, so I want to talk to you a little bit. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Good. That's nice. I'm going to talk a little bit about AI and teaching and learning. I'm going to talk probably sort of across the university, and then you'll hear more from David and Jadon that dives into some of the activities here in Bowers a little bit more. But I recognize that people may be coming to this talk from a wide variety of perspectives. Some of you may be very expert. You may be building these tools. Some of you may not know a lot about them. So let me say a couple of quick things, to get us started. This is probably the one you almost all will have heard of and know. ChatGPT is in some ways the Kleenex of AI these days, right? If you know one tool, it's probably that, and that's because of the way ChatGPT exploded onto the public scene. We also, on the campus, and we have a lot that involves image generation. We have a lot that involves code generation. So this one here, GitHub Copilot, is particularly relevant to things that happen here in Bowers. In addition, there's a wide variety of other large language models. Claude from Anthropic, Gemini is the Google tool. DeepSeek, because we are a global campus, we also see DeepSeek, which is one of the main Chinese competitors in this space, and Microsoft Copilot, which is actually a product that we have an ephemeral, university-wide license towards. So when students or faculty enter things into the Cornell instance of Microsoft Copilot, it does not go back into the mothership to feed the model, which is different than if a student is entering something on kind of the worldwide sort of open space. There's a couple you probably haven't heard of, and I'll introduce those in a minute, but there's a whole category of tools that are specific to the teaching and learning environment that we have been experimenting with at Cornell, partly developing here at Cornell, and I'll say a bit more about that. Three things about AI. AI is not really very new by some standards, right? So the field of AI really goes back to the 1950s. It goes through various periods. There are various flavors of it. Sometimes people like to talk about AI winters and summers and springs. We're probably the middle of July right now on those measures. It has changed over time, right? So if you think up to around here, what we're seeing is what sometimes people refer to as good old-fashioned AI, and that worked on a model of trying to represent the world in a structured way. It was a little bit closer to human reasoning. It was sort of an ontological approach that is different than what we're doing now. I want to make one editorial comment on this. This didn't jump out of any one individual's brain, unformed or unsupported. This is a story of federal research, right? No federal research, no AI. Flat out, blanket statement. Okay, this is the active learning portion of the thing here. After eating their fill of the sweet green grass, the horse and the cow returned home to the farm. Okay, anyone want to say farm? Why not farm? Hands, please. Why not farm? Yeah. Why not farm? Because they're already on the farm. You're getting from this context that they're already on the farm. Why not the hotel room? Because you know that horses and cows don't live in hotel rooms. We think they live in barns. Now, a couple of points here. So if you entered this into search, LLM, they'd probably land on barn too. But they wouldn't do any of the things you've just done in terms of reasoning, all right? What the LLM is doing, this is a problem of text prediction or word prediction. And basically what they're saying is statistically, in association, over massive corpuses of data, we think these sentences like this usually end in barn, all right? So that's really different because it's important to know that when AI thinks, when AI is intelligent, it is not thinking like a human. It follows a different kind of logic. There's maybe another point to make here, which we could relate to the global nature of AI and perhaps questions of AI bias. There are parts of the world where horses and cows don't live in barns, right? If you entered this in those countries, in those places, you'd probably still get barn, right? Because of the way the data falls globally, right? And what the models are trained on. So that is kind of one simple way of describing the problem of AI bias, is to live in a representational world that is not quite built for you. All right, so I want to bear this in mind too. Finally, this is my work, so I have to say it. AI is also not very virtual. Computing is not very virtual, right? I teach a class and lead a research group called the Computing on Earth Lab, or the Computing on Earth class. And we look at things like computing-related sourcing and extraction, energy and water, waste and repair. So when you think of AI, or when you think of computing, you should also understand that it is not a cloud, right? It involves physical things, it involves material interactions, and those are really important to think about as we move forward. Okay, I want to switch gears to teaching and learning, and I want to give you 3 statements. These are actual statements from a survey I'll introduce in a minute. Generative AI is changing the way I teach or learn and represents an enormous opportunity to rethink how we do teaching and learning at Cornell. Generative AI is the single biggest threat to teaching and learning at Cornell, or in Discipline X or College Y, in many decades. Finally, the meh response. Generative AI, as it currently operates, is a bland tool that produces mediocre results and has had little effect on learning in my field. And our answer to that is yes. Yes, all 3 of those things are true, right? All 3 of those things are actually accurate, correct statements about how generative AI is unfolding around the university to date. So these are things that came out, those quotes are things that came out of a survey we ran of all faculty and all students at Cornell this past spring. It's the largest single institutional survey in the country. We had 3,000, just under 3,000 responses. And there's enormous data there. If you really want to dive into it, at the URL there, we put all the data up online, all the quantitative data, so the world can look at this stuff. 2 patterns to call out. Faculty and staff on average, as you might imagine, are on different places around both use and perspective on the use of generative AI tools in education. So you can see here, 29% of students use generative AI tools daily. If you add in once a week or several times a week, you're up to, somebody can do the math there, 70%. Thank you. On the faculty side, much lower, right? So faculty are not as frequent users of these tools as our students. Here's what we thought of as the barometer question of the survey. Overall, generative AI tools have improved teaching and learning at Cornell. 40% of our students, all ranks, this is undergrad, master's, PhD, 40% agreed or strongly agreed with that statement. Only 16% of faculty did. Now, the other thing I want to dive into just briefly before moving on is how students are using these tools, right? This comes from the survey data. And if you want to summarize broadly, they're using them in lots of ways. Some of them, I would say, are pretty awesome and pro-learning. This is part of how you can answer 40%. It's improving teaching and learning at Cornell. So we see things like explaining or clarifying materials, technical support, which is kind of a category here, which includes coding and math help with language, and Jadon, I think, is going to pick up on some of these points. It's a really interesting language tool. Collaborate, summarize sources, brainstorming, summarizing lecture slides or notes. Some of them are not so awesome, right? So this is self-report from students. 18% of students self-reported, anonymous survey, although there were some suspicions that it was a sting operation. We were following the Reddit threads on this, and the students were saying, oh, they're just trying to catch me, which is not true. But 18% of students have sometimes, often, or very often used it to complete entire assignments. I'd encourage you to do this on do your own survey, right? Many of you will know, or you might have, you might know kids who are in the college age. It could be at Cornell, it could be somewhere else. You may be around campus for the next few days. Talk to students, ask them how they're using it. This is my mole. This is my daughter, not at Cornell, at a rival to Cornell. Ooh, yeah, it's, I asked her and kind of watched her over the last couple of years how she's using this. She uses it to explain concepts she didn't get from the lecture. Sometimes she'll rerun lecture slides to get, improve clarity. I like this one. Sometimes she'll try and get, if she gets the details, but she doesn't get why it matters. Like, why is this important? What's the big picture story here? Sometimes generative AI helps with that. Generating additional examples of a concept. In my intro economics class, they were talking about comparative advantage, and they had this like old example of like Portugal makes wine and the UK makes wool. Give me some other examples. Help me wrap my head around this, all right? Generating outlines or essays, we can talk about. I put asterisk on this because depending on your theory of writing, that's either awesome or terrible, right? I happen to be I follow Hemingway, who says architecture is writing, not interior decoration. The main thing I want students to do is figure out the architecture of ideas. There are 3 kinds of things in the world. There are 4 problems with this argument, right? So different places on that. And again, enormous stuff around language that I think Jadon will pick up on too. Okay, so I want to talk about some of the ways we're responding. So on campus this fall, we have 4 different generative AI tool pilots going on. In addition to the university-wide Microsoft Copilot generic tool license, we have a number of tools that are used. I won't go deeply into any of these, other than to note this one. This is from the HITA or HITA tool that Renee Kizilchich, our colleague who directs the Future of Learning Lab here in Bowers CIS, is the chief scientist for. And this is a really interesting tool for me because it allows instructors to upload the content for their course, like a reading list, a set of associated resources. And when students ask for responses to prompts, it goes first to the curated set of things that the instructor has provided, right? That's really important. It also draws on a larger, a suite of underlying large language models. But this is really important because you're getting an instructor eye view of the field. That's really different than going out sort of into LLMs in general. It also allows Renee or whoever is using it to see interactions that students are having with the tool. So you can actually see what they're prompting, and you can see where they're struggling. Oh, I thought I explained this really well, but I can tell from the pattern that students are not getting it. All right? So yeah. Yep, all of those things. Yep, readings, right, would be another example. You could upload a series of quizzes to have the tool help generate additional practice quizzes that kind of follow that form. Yep, so it's.
Asked if he uploads his syllabus, curriculum, lecture notes, previous quizzes, and the answer was yes.
Yeah, so for those, I'm not sure those in the back, the question was, do you upload syllabus, practice quizzes, previous resources, and the answer is yes. Yeah, I understand people in the back probably can't hear, so I'll repeat. Here's another example. This is a tool developed by Toby Alt in Earth and Atmospheric Science, and it's a Socratic tool dialogue. Haida, actually the previous one, also has examples of this. And these are tools that operate not in a giving you the answer mode, but giving you a Socratic response. So if I try and get an answer under Haida or Toby's Socrates tool, I'll say, what's the answer to this? It'll do that annoying thing that a good TA or a good teacher does. It say, well, how would you arrive at that? You would need to know this and this. So it doesn't just spit out the answer, it puts it back on the student, right? All of these tools, there's a whole world of educational theory behind this. Operate across Bloom's taxonomy, which if you haven't encountered it, is a way we think about the scaling of knowledge and expertise in our teaching efforts. So if you want to think at the bottom of the pyramid, this is, going from top to bottom, this is memorizing the parts of the limbic system. And this is doing original cancer research. All right, that's one way to think about Bloom's taxonomy. There's an enormous effort now to rethink assessment at the university. We've seen some move back to controlled testing environments. You've probably read about this or seen this. 2 years ago would have been a really good time to buy stock in Blue Book companies, as one way of putting that. Interesting experiments in oral assessment. I'll tell you about one in a minute. Scaffolded assignments, some faculty are leaning more into active and engaged learning in really interesting ways. And we have a working group on this across the university that's been operating in the last couple of years that you can read more about at the link I'd shared earlier. Academic integrity is a challenge, and we are working through it. This is just one upcoming event. We've had a lot of events on this. Important work around evidentiary standards. How do we, if there is an instance or we suspect an instance of an academic integrity violation, how do we bring a reasonable case in the absence of a smoking gun? So unlike a traditional plagiarism case, you go find this thing that was written in 1997 and the paragraph is the same, and that's the smoking gun. Generative AI doesn't do that, right? It doesn't produce the same thing repeatedly, ever, basically. There's some other things here we could talk about that actually Bowers has been important in piloting. And then the other thing I'll say almost nothing about, other than to show you some weird symbols, is that we've come up with an effort to better express course policies in a standardized way. So courses are landing in different places on this because courses have different learning goals and different pedagogical needs. And therefore, we've arrived at this system, this combination, individual or combinations of these 7 symbols, we believe in looking at academic integrity and AI policies at the university and across the country, name something like 90 to 95% of the use cases. And this is, for those interested, this is kind of modeled loosely after the Creative Commons licensing system. Okay, we're also doing a lot of learning research on this. A bunch of that is happening in Bowers. You'll be hearing from Jadon in a minute, some really exciting work. We have a whole cadre of, a growing cadre of faculty across the university that we are sometimes called disciplinary-based education researchers, who are tenure track, for an example, Natasha Holmes in physics is a tenure track faculty in physics whose research area is physics education. All right, it's a really important part of Cornell's response, well, improvement of teaching in general. And we do a lot in the unit I oversee, the Center for Teaching Innovation. One way of characterizing our response that we've used is we support faculty in leaning in and leaning out. So leaning in would be I want to experiment. I want to see how these tools could change the way I teach in my class. Leaning out means I'm concerned about what these tools are doing in the environment. It's kind of upsetting the way I've normally taught. But it's not, leaning out is not sticking your head in the sand. Leaning out is, how do I effectively alter the way I'm teaching in order to accommodate to the new environment? So we've had 1,800 faculty come through Center for Teaching Innovation workshops in the past year, which is about a 300% increase over 2 years ago. Some of that's generative AI, some of that is the many other programs we run. But the note I would want to make to you, or the observation, is that faculty are really leaning in on that question. Okay, couple of quick examples. This is Peter Katzenstein. He's a professor of international relations in the government department. He has done a really interesting project in his writing, America Confronts the World is the name of the class. And what he does is he has students generate their position on a thing, and then he helps them prompt generative AI to develop counter arguments. So students are encountering a wider range of ideas. They're given an assignment, they think they know how it should go, and then they use generative AI to bring in other perspectives. I've actually borrowed this in my own teaching in a project with Chan Yang, a colleague in information science. So the example in my class is I have them I gave you the kind of the rough content of the class. At some point in the class, I have them write a national e-waste bill. There is no national e-waste law in the US. There's about half the states have one. So I said, well, what if we were to write a national e-waste bill? I have the students draft it, and then I have them prompt generative AI to say, what would a conservative lawmaker say about that? And what would a liberal policymaker say about that? And it brings different ideas into the room, right? So the students have this thing that they start with, and then maybe they shade liberal themselves. They read, oh, a conservative policymaker makes this point about regulatory burden I hadn't really thought about. Or what might this do to small and medium-sized enterprises? Well, maybe I should adjust my law and we'll introduce a scale threshold, right? This applies to firms above a certain market cap or revenue or whatever. So it's a really powerful way of bringing difference into our classes used appropriately. I'm going to skip over a couple examples. This is one I like because this is an example from the Brooks School, Ann Byrne. In her class, rather than give the students a generative AI course policy, she says, let's write one together. You all know how you're using it. You understand how the class works. Let's start the class by writing our generative AI policy together. So she learns a lot about what students are doing, and they can come up with something that works well together. I'm going to give you one leaning out example. This is from Brian Kirby in engineering. And each semester now, he runs oral assessments for his fluid mechanics class of 150 students, right? Oral assessments is a really interesting tool that has been a little bit abandoned, I would say, historically. We've kind of gone more towards written tests and written environments, but people are coming back to it. And Brian's work shows that it can be done, right? Like the presumption is like, oh, oral assessments, that's cute. That's nice if you have 15 students. Brian has shown that you can do it at a scale of 150, and he does it as a mock technical job interview. So if you're an engineer going out to have your technical job interview, you got to know your stuff, and you got to know your stuff live on your feet, right? So that's what this is meant to replicate. Okay, last thing I want to say, teaching is always the story, right? So I've told you a little bit about tools, but really the heart of any of the examples I've shared is that these are creative teachers who are understanding the nature and the challenges of pedagogy in their discipline. They're learning the affordances and the limits of the tools, and they're doing something original. And then they're borrowing each other's ideas. I sort of feel like much of my job at the university is like collecting things across the university and showing them to other people. These are the principles we're steering by. We've talked about this in leadership. We talked about it at Faculty Senate. I've talked about it at the Student Assembly with students. This is really what's driving our approach. This is actually an old line from Expertise, Science and Democracy literatures, but what we're going towards is AI on tap, not on top. It's there as a tool. It's there to be usefully deployed. And we rely on the creativity of our folks to do that. Lesson, I was giving a talk to the entire entering class of AAP earlier this week. And what I told them is, the thing isn't the thing, the learning is the thing, right? Students sometimes get hung up on the, I need my final project to be just right. The secret is, I don't actually care what your final project looks like on some level. What I care is that you've learned this stuff, right? So in cases where generative AI is producing beautiful products, but undermining the learning, that is not working, right? I would much rather have a crappy looking, well, crappy's maybe crappy. I mean, that's a little too strong. I'd like to have a pretty good final product that supports learning. I'm going to end with a weird analogy, partly just because I haven't had enough pictures in this slide. And this, how many, okay, let me ask you this. How many of you have recently cooked a pot roast or a ham or whatever the hell that is in a microwave? Okay, some of you were alive in the 1980s, as I were, and there was a period of time where people were cooking hams and pot roasts and terrible rubbery eggs and awful soggy bacon. I'm seeing people nodding, like, or kind of a little tick reaction. In some ways, I feel like this is where we're at now with generative AI in the teaching and learning environment. Eventually, we learned to not do this, right? We figured it out. I use my microwave every day. It hasn't gone, but I still have an oven, right? And I think that's where we're going to land. And our effort to work through this experimentally through research in an evidence-based way is a way to put generative AI in its place. I think in 5 years, we'll be using it more and less, but we'll be using it in the right places. And that's really where we need to land on this in the learning environment. All right, and with that, I will hand things off to my friend and colleague, David Mimno, Chair of Information Science.
Wow, I hadn't realized how big this was. Thank you, everyone, for coming. So as Steve said, I'm the Chair of Information Science, and I wanted to give you a bit of a view into the faculty meetings that we're having right now, because we absolutely do not have this figured out, but I want to give you a little insight into how we're approaching things. Can people hear me in the back? Great, okay. So I've been working in natural language processing for basically my entire academic career. It started working about 3 years ago. That was kind of amazing. And the way I describe it, my view of what a large language model is it's a search engine over documents that don't quite exist. So we have some set of documents that people have actually written on the web. And what these models do are sort of interpolating to the document that maybe you actually want somewhere in the middle, okay? And over the past 3 years, we've started to get a sense of, following up on Steve's microwave example, what are these models actually good at? And one of the things that everyone in the industry would tell you is that code, writing programming code, is the big thing right now. For 4 thumbs up. Editing English, so critiquing English, also pretty good. Writing English from scratch, you're getting into rocky territory. Anything outside of English, also not quite so good. One thing, I don't know if you've noticed, but a lot of people use these models for research. And if you don't know an area very well, wow, seems really good. And if you do know an area really well, this is bland and surface. And so, you can extrapolate from that. Okay, but I really want to, especially because of the building that we're in, I want to focus on code. And the message is, this is not going away. Like, even the Amish use power tools because there is no other way to make money in woodworking. Anyone who is going to be a commercial programmer is going to be using AI tools. Full stop, okay? The way I describe it is, write the next 50 lines of code is dead. I can describe what I want, make a little comment at the beginning of the file, and whatever tool I'm using, I personally like Claude, it'll just sort of fill in that script. And I look at it and like, yep, that's pretty much what I would have written over the next 2 hours, but it's better formatted and has more comments. Okay, so the problem is, I've been programming for a while. I know what to ask for, and I know how to evaluate whether I got what I wanted, and I know that is going to be a problem. I need to fix it or start over, okay? But what we're observing, what a lot of the faculty are observing from student performance is that students are performing really poorly. And what's maybe more important is they are surprised, the students are surprised by how little they're learning because they're producing these great things. So is this AI? So we like to call this the triple whammy that students right now are facing. So coronavirus interrupted a lot of their high school and increasingly middle school careers. There was a lot of changes of expectations in how to be a student that we're sort of working through right now. Phones have really changed the students' interaction with information. They want things right now in exactly the format they want on their time frame. They have never had the experience of waiting till Thursday evening for their favorite show to come on. Like the students right now have never experienced anything other than video on demand. And ultimately, you know, with AI, the way we think of it, no matter how motivated they are, outside of the classroom, if there's an easy button, someone's going to press it. And Steve put some numbers to that. So how worried should we be about this? So, do we do the same thing that we've done and try to make it work, or do we pivot? And you know, there's examples like, you know, if you were an engineering student 50 or 60 years ago, anyone recognize this type of room? Yeah. You might have spent a lot of time in a room like this learning drafting. So engineering drawing was really, really important in engineering education, and now we do it in CAD. And nobody's particularly sad about that. Okay, okay, maybe you are. Maybe you love the smell of the ink in the field paper. Yeah, I use a fountain pen. I love it. Programming itself, you know, here's Grace Hopper within living memory inventing the programming language. Like this is not something that we have done forever. Maybe we don't need to do it forever too. People have said that, you know, in the next 10 years, the most common programming language is going to be English. Yeah. So incredible opportunities here. And, you know, we mentioned Socratic method. Here's actual Socrates complained 2,400 years ago that, you know, this technology of writing is going to destroy memory by making people appear wise when they don't actually know anything. So the idea that technology is making us dumb is very old. Okay. So a lot of people, when faced with this, we talk about things like soft skills and hard skills. Like what is our goal in education? I don't love those terms. I think it's kind of value laden. And something that I've been developing is more of sort of an orthogonal idea of thin skills and thick skills. So a thin skill is something it's quick, it's factual. Like, do you know what the derivative of e to the x is? Like, if you don't, I can tell you right away. And if you don't know it, I can figure out very quickly. So that's an example of a thin skill. A thick skill is something like, can you convince your boss that they're making a mistake? This takes years of practice. You know, someone comes in as a PhD student, they can write a method section, you know, pretty well, but it takes them 4 years to learn how to write an introduction. So that kind of thick skill is the sort of thing that takes years of practice. It's hard to evaluate, but these are the things that we actually want when we're hiring. Okay. So how does this apply to programmers? You know, a thin skill might be something like, why is this code throwing a key error? And you need a lot of these thin skills. But the thick skill is something like, will this code become a maintenance nightmare in 6 months? And the things that we need students to know are things like basic syntax. Can you read the code and understand what it's doing? Okay. What are the environments that we're working in? What are the APIs, libraries? What are you trying to program in? And you know, we talk about increasingly students have no idea what a file is. That's a common complaint. Okay. And then goals and capabilities. What can you do? What should you try to do? What are the realm of affordances? So what are we left with? What do we really need students to do? And one of the things that I think is really important and that we cannot compromise on is this is a quote from one of my PhD students who's taught some intro programming, which is that students think they're learning syntax when they're actually learning a whole new way of thinking. And this is why they're often very anxious about learning a new programming language after the first one. They think it's going to be just as hard when people learned a second or third programming language, it's much easier. And that's because your brain has been rewired to think like a programmer. And that's really what we're doing in programming education. And that's why we're probably, like Steve said, we're going to be leaning out on an AI for intro programming. The other thing is John Osterhout at Stanford has a great class that's sort of a studio for programming design. He's got a book about it. And this is ideas like finding the right abstraction and not settling for your first guess. So this is really about design. And that's another thing, one of those thick skills that we really need to get students to learn. Okay. So finally, can we design better AI systems? And this is where I'll increasingly turn it over to folks like Jadon. I was inspired by this quote by Andrej Karpathy, who is a world-class programmer. Like, this is not a novice here, who is saying that I want to learn along the way and become better as a programmer, not just get served mountains of code that I'm told works. This is inspirational. This is what we should be going for. Also, there's blind spots in teaching. This is don't try to read this, it's too small. This is a paper that I saw at a conference last week where they're I don't know if you've seen models are increasingly giving you sort of thinking or reasoning. I use the scare quotes because they're not thinking. But they noticed that some models were using cognitive strategies like verification, backtracking, sub-goals, working backwards more than others. And I thought, okay, I don't care about the models. Let's go back to the when are we actually teaching kids verification, backtracking, sub-goals, and working backwards? Where's the document out on the web where we're documenting the reasoning trace of someone failing to prove something and then going back and getting it right? I don't know if we do that. And that's something that had, by using this sort of, again, Socratic dialogue with the machines, it's identified a blind spot for me at least. Okay. And finally, to highlight some work done in this building by my colleague Chan Yang, if you have a system that, I don't know if you can see the gray bars on here. Okay. I'll keep it short. If you have a system that is allowing people to mindlessly copy, to just hit tab and autocomplete, they will get some increase in their creativity and their sort of creative output. But if you have a system, I think this is entirely, there should be gray bars. Can anyone see those? No, okay, all right, failed slide. If you have a system that identifies that people are just hitting tab and auto-completing and says, sorry, no, I'm not going to give you that anymore. I'm going to force you to think more and give you, probe, like be a sparring partner. And they're again calling it Socratic AI, so Socrates again. You get more creativity faster. And what they're showing is that if you just have people, just accept suggestion, accept suggestion, accept suggestion, you get very low creativity. But if you have more interaction and you force people to engage more, then you get, not a whole lot more than you would otherwise, but a significant increase. I'll take one quick question. Yeah. Yeah.
You're focusing a lot on creating programming, but when I read the bugging,
Yep.
which the AI is going to, okay, I see some interviews and the street going to, here's a buggy program, figure out what's wrong.
Mm-hmm. So the question is about debugging versus writing from scratch, and that is absolutely something that we're really leaning in on. It's kind of a blind spot. Like we teach people how to program from an empty screen. Most of what you're doing in industry is maintaining, improving, increasing, and that sort of debugging. I think of it as almost being like a code mechanic. Like you want to listen to that ping sound and figure out that that's actually this over here. So yeah, exactly. That's really what we're looking for. So just to close up, can AI partner and not pamper? Code generation is great. There's no way we're not going to use it. It is fantastic for that sort of generation. It's not good, exactly as we were saying, for if anything goes wrong, then you're less successful. The students that we have, and we have to take them where they're coming from, are stressed and overcommitted, and they can't always resist the temptation to get help that isn't helpful. Class time with instructors is precious. And one of the things we're trying to do is kick out the technology and make things more paper-oriented, more attention-oriented, and that has shown initial success. Nobody's thrown rocks at us yet, but they seem to like it. And what we really need is more better ratios of faculty and TAs to students, so we get that kind of interpersonal connection. We need research on better design AI tools that students will actually use. It's very disheartening to do these wonderful things and then just watch students copy and paste from ChatGPT. And we really need to take advantage of the opportunities that we have to do experiments and to create experiences in class and really analyze those and figure out what's working and what's not, and design those experiences as experiments. So thank you very much, and I'll turn it over to Claire.
All right, hello everyone. My name is Jadon Geathers. I'm a second-year PhD student here at Cornell in Information Science, and I'm working with Renee Kizilchech in the Future of Learning Lab. So I hope you enjoyed these two excellent presentations so far, but now I'm going to take a little different of an approach and show you some of the really cool and exciting research that we're doing using AI in educational technology. And so this is the product I've been working on for several months here as part of my research, which is called Chitter Chatter. And it's allowing us to re-envision language learning here at Cornell. So whenever I start off a presentation like this, I always like to ask a question to the audience. Can you raise your hand if you've ever studied a language that was different than your native language? Maybe that was oh wow, okay, I didn't even need to follow up on that. If you looked around, that was effectively everyone who is sitting here. But now I have a follow-up for you. Can you raise your hand again if you've ever felt anxious or unconfident or uncertain when actually speaking that language you're studying? So keep your hands up and take a look around at how many hands are up right now. So this is something universal we're experiencing. We all want to learn a language, but when it actually comes time to engage with people, we're faced with barriers, anxiety, discomfort, things that prevent us from being able to engage naturally. And you're not at all alone in feeling this. When I've talked to students here at Cornell, I've heard the same sorts of ideas. One student told me that it's really difficult to speak with native speakers because they feel insecure, like they're being judged by the other person, or like they're going to make a mistake, because perfection is what they need to focus on. Another student highlighted the simple lack of opportunities or resources. They said, I'm in my language class, but we don't really have a lot of time in class to speak. And when I look for a native speaker, it's kind of hard to come by. And sometimes the person I'm speaking with just vanishes because the commitment might be too much. But despite these barriers that we face in learning a language, it is true that many of us have strong intrinsic motivations for wanting to learn a language in the first place. One student told me that it's because they wanted to connect closer to their cultural roots and be closer to their families. One student told me because I want to know more about K-pop. Another student told me, I have a partner who speaks this language. And one student told me that they wanted to finally be able to connect with their grandparents who only speak their native tongue. And so we have so many motivations for learning a language, yet speaking proficiency remains very low. In fact, 71.9% of high schoolers remain below intermediate low proficiency in speaking after 4 years of studying. That's barely able to hold conversations over simple topics. And I've definitely found myself in this bucket too. I love language learning. Throughout my undergrad, I took courses in French, in Spanish, and in Mandarin, and I really enjoyed it. Yet I found that I never became particularly proficient in any of them. And so when I came here to Cornell, noticing that around half my cohort was from China, I told them, I'm going to take a different approach to language learning. From this day on, never speak to me ever in English again. And they said, okay. And so the first month was extremely difficult, as you can imagine. But slowly I found that in engaging with my friends regularly, I was feeling more and more comfortable and confident, and my proficiency in Mandarin developed much faster than any of the other languages I had studied before, despite Mandarin being one of the hardest languages for English language speakers to learn. So I said, man, I wish that when I was in language classes, I had this experience to access low stakes opportunities to speaking practice. I wish there was some tool that allowed me to do that. And so my idea was born. So I developed Chitter Chatter, which is a program that facilitates speaking practice for students using conversational AI. That's AI that you can speak with. And your first question might be, what's the difference between something like this and existing tools like Duolingo or ChatGPT? And I say that's a great question. But with Duolingo, the problem there is that it's inherently too structured. You have a team that designs a very linear curriculum that all students must follow, right? And they also focus more on gamification to keep user retention than actual student learning. And so the effect is that you get students who are developing their proficiency, as many of you may have used Duolingo, but only to a basic or very low intermediate level. Similarly, tools like ChatGPT are great. As we've seen here, can handle many tasks, as Stephen alluded to, like language learning. But the problem there is if you don't really have domain knowledge in language pedagogy, it's very hard to navigate your own language journey, identify exactly what your weaknesses are, maybe what you need to practice more, what you shouldn't be practicing as much. And so the core idea of Chitter Chatter is this. Rather than having too much structure, we allow educators themselves to create practice cases that are pedagogically and curricularly aligned with what they're covering in class, catering to their students' proficiency level. Students then engage in authentic conversational practice with this speech-to-speech AI in a variety of situations, whether that's at a cafe, speaking with a friend at a park, or something else. Once they engage in those conversational practice settings, they receive feedback. And this is feedback that's focused primarily on pragmatics. Because one of the problems that we face in language learning is that students are focused more on perfection than the conveyance of meaning. And my favorite example to use for this is if I come to you and I say, excuse me, I need go bathroom, where bathroom? You know exactly what I'm trying to say, right? Even though that grammatically might have not been sound, my message was conveyed to you, and students often forget about that. So when we give feedback that's generated by the AI, we make sure we present it in a positive tone that reinforces their skills and focuses more on pragmatics than perfection. Educators learn from this feedback, from analytics that they receive from these student cases, and then use this to further refine the practice cases that they create. And so I don't really think there's a better way to show off AI tools than by actually giving a live demo. So we have a backup to the backup to the backup in case this doesn't work out, but we are going to head over now to the browser so I get to show you Chitter Chatter live. So the most important aspect of Chitter Chatter when we come to the dashboard, and let me just log back in because I got automatically logged out, is the lessons page where instructors can actually create these practice cases for their students. So if I navigate to the lessons page and I go to click on creating a case, you can see that the primary function of the lessons page or case creation is to provide instructors with areas for developing a case that are clearly aligned pedagogically with what they're learning in class. So we have the basic information, which is just designed to set up some basic assignment statistics. But most importantly, we have the Learning Objectives tab, which allows instructors to specify details like the student's proficiency level to which the AI automatically adapts, the curricular goals that they may expect from the practice case, some key vocabulary and phrases. But by far, the most important aspect that instructors have a good time with is the Scenario Setup tab. So I don't want to show you the scenario setup because I'm actually going to practice this one. So it'll kind of be like a fun surprise to see what this is about. But in the scenario setup, you can specify details like the character's personality of the AI. So maybe you say, you are an 18-year-old student with whom you're having a conversation with a student discussing your after-school plans. Or maybe it's you're a 50-year-old man who's been working at a restaurant for a while and you're having a conversation about what the student would like to order. You can select from a wide variety of voices that are also supported by the speech-to-speech AI and really cater the situation so that it feels more authentic to the students. And lastly, instructors can specify the areas of feedback that they'd like to give to the student. So again, we mentioned how we don't want to focus always on perfection. Sometimes conveying meaning is more meaningful. But in the case of students who may be more advanced, for example, I've been speaking English for my whole life. And so maybe if I am using a word incorrectly, I would want someone to tell me that, as opposed to just telling me how well I conveyed my overall message. And so with this, students can then go to the practice cases and test them out for themselves. So they're immediately greeted with a reminder to take their time, explore in the conversation. Don't be afraid to make mistakes, trying to set up a low stakes environment for the students. And then they're greeted with a situation that they'll practice, which in this case is a car accident. Because I recognize that many of you do not speak Mandarin, so if I demonstrated this, you may not have any idea what I'm saying, but hopefully you can infer from the tone of my voice and the AI partner that this is not a very pleasant situation. So I'm going to go here to start the conversation. I think that the audio should be working, so we will find out very quickly. But I will click start and speak. 哎呀，对不起，你为什么看起来这么生气？
哎呀，你怎么开车的？我的车被撞坏了，这下麻烦大了。你看，这么一大片刮蹭，修起来得花多少钱？你说这责任怎么算？
哎，等一下，你是在说我不会开车吗？你疯了吗？我开车的时候看得很清楚，都是你的错。
哎，我没疯，刚才那个车位我已经打方向了，你没看见吗？那现在你说，咱们怎么协商解决？
那我们先报警好不好？我不想跟你再说了。
哎，先别急报警，咱们自己算算损坏有多少，保险理赔麻烦死。先看看能不能私下解决，你觉得呢？
Right. So you could probably tell that I was. Oh, thank you. Thank you. So you could probably tell by the tone that it was a pretty tense situation. I basically said, "Are you crazy? It's all your fault," and he was very unhappy with that. But after reaching the minimum duration of the conversation, students are greeted with summative feedback and also formative feedback, of which they can engage. Oh, I'm just actually reading the first feedback point, which you can actually engage with in as much or as little detail as you would like. So for example, you see, you clearly expressed your frustration and concern about the accident by using emotional language effectively. But if students want a bit more detail about their feedback, they can click on the dive deeper option to engage in as much or as little with the feedback as they'd like. So usually if the conversation was longer and there was enough detail for it to base on, it will use actual examples from the transcript. It's telling me to try to manage my emotional expression. So maybe I shouldn't say, 你疯了吗, which is, are you crazy, in the conversation. But furthermore, students can have the opportunity to review their conversational transcript if they would like to do so, as well as engage with a chatbot that is actually catered to the conversation itself. So if they want to ask a question like how they can improve for next time, it grounds itself in the transcript. Again, it keeps telling me about the emotional expression. So clearly that is something that I should not do in the real world. And so going back to the slides to see what students actually thought of this, which I'm going to skip over the backups. Students felt very positively about this. I mean, it creates a very low stakes environment. And one student told me, it's like speaking with an actual person. It sounds like a real person, but I don't feel like I'm actually being judged because I know that it's AI. Another student said, I would feel motivated to come back to this, just knowing that there's always an on-demand 24/7 speaking partner. And inaccessibility in language practice is one of the biggest issues that we've highlighted, and especially contributes to those feelings of anxiety we mentioned earlier. And another student told me that they're always anxious speaking, even just with their peers. But this felt much better. Because they know it's an AI, the anxiety aspect of it is definitely not there. And so actually in providing more opportunities for students to engage in speaking practice, we are essentially allowing students to engage more in the real world because they feel more comfortable. Sometimes we hear the idea that AI is preventing students from communicating and thinking fully, but in this case, AI is actually helping to reduce many of the barriers that prevent students from wanting to engage in the first place. So if you want to look or learn more about Chitter Chatter, please feel free to contact me or visit the website. But you can see that Chitter Chatter here is not only helping to improve students' proficiency, but also helping to connect educators and students by allowing educators to create practice cases for them and helping students become more connected to each other and the world overall. So thank you very much. And so now I will hand it back over to Claire, presumably.
Right. Okay, thanks. Thanks to all of our panelists. I'll invite them up here. You might have noticed that we're running over time. So I think we'll do two things. One is I'd like to skip me asking questions and just go to audience questions. Is that okay? Okay. And also to let everyone know here that if you need to attend some other activity or don't feel bad about getting up and just leaving. So we'll continue this for maybe 10 or so minutes of 10 to 15 minutes of questions or more. All right. All right.
If you leave, Jadon might shout at you in Mandarin.
Okay, so questions. We have people with mics. Yeah.
So coming from the old days, we were always concerned about the efficiency of code. Is AI conscious of speed as opposed to just getting it to function?
I could.
Wait a minute. The other part about it is, or you don't care. In our days, Moore's law, every 18 months, half the price at twice the speed. We're getting to the point where speed doesn't matter.
I could give you some choice words about efficiency and current computing. I think for the last 10 years, the answer has always been spend more money, like buy bigger GPUs. And I think there's, this is sort of getting off topic, but I think there's enormous efficiencies to be had in making the code faster. And I know there are people in this building who are working hard on that. So I think to the specific question of, is the code that's being generated efficient? The code that's being generated is going to be basically an interpolation of whatever's on GitHub. So these models are, they are, I think there's like the wheat that comes out of the internet gets ground up into flour and baked into bread by the language models. So what you get out is what people put in. And I don't know if there's any strong indication that the code is efficient in that way.
I would add one thing to that. This is sort of going back to the computing on Earth line, but efficiency matters, I think, because we need to be worried about the electricity and the water and the resources, right? So, there's been interesting work to improve the efficiency of all parts of the system, data centers, coding efficiency. There's also been moves to kind of think about, like, people have done work in this college around things like approximation algorithms. Like, what is a good enough compute, right? We can't continue to brute force our way to infinitesimally smaller improvements in outcomes on accuracy. Like, sometimes we're going to have to say things like, 98% is actually just fine, right? If getting to 99 requires a doubling of investment or resources or compute cycles or whatever.
Okay, maybe someone from the back.
Thank you. A broader sort of social question from a sociologist. what is there an expectation across the 3,300 freshmen in a year of a level of expectation of ease and knowledge in working these systems? Or is everybody coming from 3,300 different places, from 3,300 different high schools with proficiencies that are very varied?
I I can comment on that. I think that's an excellent question. And for me, I was positioned exactly at this point of change from transitioning from an educational system that was based primarily on traditional assignments with no sort of advanced AI capabilities to the extent of which we're seeing today, right? So no large language models. And I apologize, I don't see where the question asker is, but oh, I see, sorry. To now, when I walk around my PhD studio, there are often two monitors. One monitor contains the work, the other monitor contains ChatGPT. And so it's definitely been very interesting because this transformation has occurred very quickly. And to your point about recognizing the variety of backgrounds, I think that absolutely is still a problem and something we're still grappling with. I think even though we saw in earlier slides that we are using a system that outlines acceptable AI use, and we're trying to put guidelines in place. The reality is that these technologies are very actively and quickly evolving, and so there's no one-size-fits-all solution that we can apply universally to all students' backgrounds. So this is why now, instead of making any assumptions about student backgrounds, we are trying to be more proactive in terms of creating courses for students to better understand. For example, Renee Kazilchech, who is also the creator of HiTA, and I created a course called AI in Organizations, which is to help students understand how to apply and use AI in different organizational contexts, right? So I would say there is no one-size-fits-all policy or any sort of expectation that we can apply to students, but rather something that needs to be actively worked on and developed in coordination with the students as a university.
Alice, the only thing I'd add, thank you for the question. The only thing I'd add to that is if we look at the survey data, we do indeed see a fairly wide range among students. I don't think it's actually coming from differences in school district because I think most high schools haven't figured this out. None of them have figured it out. I mean, that's maybe a little too strong. But we do see students coming in with different kinds of tool fluencies, tool familiarities, tool investments, right? So we weren't talking so much about the paid versus unpaid models and differences in performance, but we do think about equity of tool access, and that's a challenge that we face. Some of our students are paying, subscribing to higher performing models, higher performing tools, and that gives them a different kind of access. One of the ways that we're seeking to address this is we've been working on a critical generative AI critical literacy resource that'll be made available across the university to all incoming students. We'll be piloting it in January, and we think it'll fully roll out across the university by the incoming class of this coming year. And that's meant to be level the playing field a little bit. It's about familiarity of tools. It's also about really thinking about the tools in the learning environment and how it intersects with what they need. So it's a really important question that we are working on.
There's one other aspect to this question. So there's variations in AI preparation, but there's also a lot of other variations in preparation. You know, we're a world university, and you know, like Jadon was suggesting, there's a lot of people coming to this university who didn't grow up like me speaking standard written academic English natively, and it's a really significant advantage to people to be able to have a tool that can say, you know, you should change the to a the, because you know the language skills are high, but there is a difference in how much work it takes someone to write an essay, for example. So I think there is an opportunity. If there's one area that I'm most excited about AI for, it's leveling that playing field in terms of language skills.
Thank you all so much. And as you're all presenting, all I can think about is how much this will benefit like society as a whole. Your language tool, you know, the empathy that you've shown through a tool that could be so simple. And my question is, especially in the United States, perhaps all around the world, the kindergarten through 12, grade, they're suffering. Kids are dropping out. There's so many studies about, failures in language skills. Is there any thought to do something like soft and get the word out, maybe to, those communities that maybe prioritizing that in the lower served communities, just to give them something to connect, something, that they could value. And it would be so great because AI, everyone's like scared of AI, and they don't realize your slide shows it's been around forever. So the more maybe there could be a promotion of all these types of benefits you've been explaining would be great. So I was wondering if there are any plans to kind of branch out of the university context and just give small bits and pieces to those that are running schools, to principals,
Yep.
and in the effort of connecting, connecting people better.
Yeah, there's certainly a bunch of work going on in that direction. So here at the university, Natalie Bazarova and Chan Yang here in Bowers have been working on AI literacy work in the K-12, right, Torsten, level. I was chatting with Soren Lerner, our incoming dean, last night. I know that's a strong interest of his as well. Like, how do we think about getting AI literacy and education interfacing into the high school level? So there's a lot of work there, a lot of work to be done though as well. It's a kind of a giant, it's an expansive kind of problem that we are working towards tackling.
I think that there's also a concern which has already started to be raised, that someone looking at a budget and saying, that's a lot of expensive teachers. Well, we can just give them AIs, and that less advantaged students would end up, sitting in front of a screen talking to ChatGPT all day instead of having that interpersonal connection with a teacher. And I think we're doing it wrong if we're replacing the teacher. We're doing it right if we're superpowering the teacher.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and I think that research, this is just adding on to the points I fully agree with, but like this kind of research here and the points that you're hearing should never be insular. So it should never be local to just the Cornell community. So we are always trying to make an active effort in communicating, because really the goal of sharing this research or developing papers or whatnot is to communicate. And that includes not just the scientific community, but communicating research to the broader public. So I think touching on your point about lower resource communities or schools that may not be as aware of these AI technologies is exactly why we are focused on events like these to spread awareness, or exactly why we're focused on public communication. So with Chitter Chatter, for example, we released a short news story that was much more digestible than like maybe the research format you would get in a paper, which I found led to many middle school instructors suddenly contacting me about the tool, right? So communication is very important and the format does matter. And I appreciate that question for that reason. But I think we do, as faculty and students, try to make an active effort in making the research public and meaningful.
So we have a question.
And this will be the last question for the morning. Thanks.
This question is for Jadon. First of all, your Mandarin's fantastic. Incredible that you speak so well for after only 2 or 3 years. So the question is about resources at Cornell for students and for professors. And there's been a big effort by Kavita to make sure the resources are there and startup packages, et cetera. And you didn't come in to do chitter chatter. But somehow you ended up it's fantastic that Cornell gave you the resources. How hard was it to get the resources, the budget, and to try this out? And then second question is the guts of chitter chatter. Can you go in a little bit? Did you take a generic LLM and then do a lot of post training, or how did you get there? And the last question is, did you try? I've never used Duolingo. Did you try off the shelf stuff and realize there's improvements that needed to be done, and therefore you went and asked Torsten or someone and said, give me resources?
Yeah, so great questions. I will do my best to remember each of them. So for the first question about resources at Cornell, you're absolutely right. I came in and did not expect to do this at all. My undergrad was in math, and my Yeah, so my master's was in computer science, and I didn't expect to pivot so strongly into language education, although that was like sort of an underlying thread that described my undergrad. And so I think asking like how hard was it to get resources, I would change the was to an is, because I'm still actively searching for opportunities. But I feel like the most important resource to me was nothing financial or nothing in terms of knowledge, but really just having the support of multiple faculty members and having people who believed in an idea. So many of the times I think faculty will be afraid to explore ideas that are outside of what they're familiar with, or they'll be unwilling because they're not sure if it will be well funded. Like you can imagine in today's context, under the current administration, language education and trying to connect different communities is a little harder to fund. But I had people who believed in my idea, and really that sort of belief was enough for me to develop a product without actually needing too much from Cornell itself. What I got from Cornell was the connections and faculty. Um, as far as the product itself and how it works, I will take maybe a bit of a higher level view just so it's more interpretable. But basically, under the hood of everything, we're using OpenAI's real-time API model. And real-time API is a speech-to-speech model. OpenAI, by the way, is the company that created ChatGPT, which is arguably the most famous of the large language models. And so what happens is we have something called a system prompt, which guides the behavior of the AI model. So through that system prompt, we tell it something to the effect of, you are a language tutor, but you do not want to make it seem like you're AI at all. Your job is to sound like a human, which it's clearly doing a fairly good job with. But effectively, when the instructors fill out each of the text boxes, those instructions are sent to the back end of the system. So it goes behind the scenes and is concatenated to this system prompt, which again is determining the behavior of the system, so that the model has a reference point it can use for whatever utterance it produces next. And as far as if there's anything different that we're doing with the model itself, we actually are just using the plain out-of-the-box real-time API, and there's a reason we're doing this. So as we've heard earlier, there can be a lot of suspicion around AI and uncertainty and hesitancy because maybe people view it as replacing existing structures, and change is difficult. It's easy to resist change. But many instructors have, by this point, heard of and recognize ChatGPT and are becoming more comfortable with that. So my idea was, if I just use the plain out-of-the-box model that instructors are starting to get familiar with, it may be easier to explain to them what's going on in this system. If I came to them and said, oh, I did some fine-tuning and preference optimization and blah, 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 they're going to be like, I don't know what that is. That is a black box and I do not understand. So they would be more skeptical of that. But in just using the black box model, whenever I present this to instructors and they ask, what AI is it using? I'm like, have you heard of ChatGPT? And they're like, oh, yeah, my students use that all the time, blah, blah, blah. And as for Duolingo, which I believe this is your last point, can you remind me of what? Yeah, so for those of you who haven't used Duolingo before, when you log into the interface, it shows you this really beautiful map. And each on the map has a bunch of circles that are connected by a very squiggly path. And this is the curriculum that you follow in Duolingo. And Duolingo has also added actually speech-to-speech, which is sort of what I'm doing, that follows along with this path. And so students go and they click on each lesson. It will show them some drag and drop options for doing direct translation. And then it'll have very, very structured scenarios that they follow linearly until they reach a beautiful golden trophy that says, you have finished the course. And then they go out in the real world and they're like, okay, I've practiced going to the movie theater and buying tickets. And they're used to the phrase like, okay, I'm going to buy 2 tickets. And they go up to the counter and say, hello, I would like to get tickets. And the person at the counter says, do you want popcorn? And then they're like, oh my God, that wasn't in my Duolingo course. Because Duolingo does not focus on spontaneity. It focuses on user retention and engagement because that's its profit model. And it focuses on gamification because that's what keeps people hooked. So these simple drag and drop or translation activities make you feel good, but they're not actually what leads to people developing language. When you're a baby, you're sitting there and you don't know English, your parents don't come up to you and say, I do, you do, he does, she does, we do, they do. Rather, they engage with you spontaneously. One day they may say, hi, baby. Another day they say, hello. And over time, you get an understanding of how to respond in this situation. And so what Chitter Chatter does is it creates those scenarios, but it doesn't provide any sort of rigid constraints on how that may go, which allows students to engage more spontaneously and associate language with ideas rather than with translation or gamification.
Thank you.
Sorry, that was
All three. That was good.
So thank you to all of the panelists, of course, and thanks to the audience, especially those who stuck it out this late. Have a great rest of your weekend.